Hello, I'm Philip, and I've worked in hospitals all my life as a biochemist. So after 45 years, I've learnt quite a lot about the healthcare system. And some 25 years ago, I had a life-threatening illness. What was complicated about that was that I knew something was wrong, and despite consultations with a number of doctors over that time, I failed to get a diagnosis. And finally, on our honeymoon, after Kaylene and I got married, I became quite ill and I struggled to keep it secret from Kaylene. And when we got back from my honeymoon, I sought further medical advice, and by that time the symptoms were quite apparent, and I was diagnosed with gastroesophageal cancer, which is fairly rare in a 40-year-old male. It's usually a disease that occurs in the 60s. But once we got that diagnosis, it had to be dealt with, and it all happened in quite a rush.
Philip came home, I remember the day very, very clearly. It was a Friday, and Philip had a follow-up appointment with the gastroenterologist, having had a scope. And he walked in the door, and I was standing in the kitchen. I had a glass of wine in my hand, and I said, "How was your appointment with the gastroenterologist?" And he said, "I have stomach cancer." And I said to him, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat it, please?" And he said, "I have stomach cancer." Not surprisingly, I cried. I cried for probably 24 hours. And after that, I said, "We can beat this. I'm not a quitter." And we are both very capable people, and we have much love, and we can beat it. Philip and I had long been married. We had married in November, and Philip was diagnosed the following January, and it was Friday before the Australia Day weekend. And it was a very long weekend, but at the end of it, I came out a much stronger person and very determined. That was the beginning of our journey, and it truly was only the beginning, but we both grew stronger. For me, as a carer, and I realised only in retrospect that I was a carer, I asked myself what I could do to help Philip, and as a carer, you're an observer. And it's sometimes harder to be a carer than it is to be the patient, I think. So what I could do was to be the healthy chef, as I called myself. And we went from not so healthy diet to a much healthier diet. And that was the responsibility I took on as part of the carer. And of course, post-surgery, because Philip had extensive surgery, I always say he was cutting quarters, my role there was obviously to also make sure that he was healing. It was quite a journey, but also one that I learned a great deal about myself, I learned a great deal about Philip, and I learned a great deal about cancer.
Yeah, I remember that weekend quite strongly, and I also recall quite vividly the circumstances where the diagnosis was conveyed to me for the first time. So I had been scoped on the Wednesday, and it would have been quite obvious to the gastroenterologist who did the endoscope that I had advanced cancer. And when I woke up from the anaesthetic, he said, "You better come and see me at my rooms at midday on Friday." So I dutifully turned up at midday on Friday, And by that time, of course, the gastroenterologist had got the histology back saying that I had an adenocarcinoma, which is a fairly aggressive tumour. And the guy was too scared to call me in to give me the news. And I sat there from midday till 7 o'clock at night after he'd seen about 30 patients in the afternoon, and he finally, after everybody else had left the waiting room, at 7 o'clock at night he called me in and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, you have inoperable stomach cancer, and you have a very poor prognosis, but we can buy you some time with chemotherapy, but really there's no other way out of this problem, and it's too far advanced to hope for a surgical cure." So that was pretty devastating, and it was a very long weekend. I was working at St Vincent's Hospital at that time in a department called clinical pharmacology, and it just so happened that clinical pharmacology and gastroenterology at that time collaborated on a lot of research work. So on the Monday, which is a public holiday, I actually rang up the director of gastroenterology at his home because I had his home phone number, and his wife told me that he was at the hospital doing rounds. So I called the hospital switchboard and asked for them to page him, and he took the call and said, "Come in and see me." And it all happened very rapidly after that because the director of gastroenterology, of course, had contacts with all the top gastrointestinal surgeons. And by Tuesday morning, I was being seen by the associate professor in abdominal surgery, who happened to be an expert on gastroesophageal cancer. So I was very lucky that I came across a surgeon who had a great interest in this particular tumour.